Hello everybody, my name is Padmadhar and I live in Boston, Massachusetts. Before we actually go into the topic of how the Indian Americans are influencing or being influenced by American politics, I want to spend a little bit time understanding like demographics of the community. Indian Americans constitute about 1.2% of American population. The overall population of the United States is about like 400 million people, whereas like Indian Americans are about like 4 million people, right? Like that's about 1.2% of the population. Indian Americans, out of them, 70% are like the first generation Indian Americans, and 30% are second generation Indian Americans. Second generation means somebody who is born to like the parents whose parents are Indian, right? But their whole experience perhaps is like American upbringing and American experience. Now let's talk about like how did all these 4 million people of Indian Americans come into the country. One can categorize this really into three different waves of immigration. Before 1965, there were like not many Indian Americans in the country, and that's by choice. I won't go into the details of like why there was not many people there, but like it's the policies of the U.S. government at that time that prevented anybody from Asian countries coming into the United States. Now, in 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signed a bill it's also called as Hart-Celler Act. It's also called 1965 Immigration Act, which really paved for like people from like non-European nations to come into the country. That includes Indians. So the first wave of immigrants started around like 1965, and most of them are like still pursuing higher education, and they are still like very high caliber individuals like doctors, engineers, like high caliber, highly talented individuals coming into the country. But now the second cohort, as somebody described it as like a family cohort, are the individuals who are the family of like this first generation of individuals. And that started around like 1970, 1980, around that time frame. Now, the third cohort, as we describe it as like the IT cohort, really started around like 1995 to 2000, around that time frame. Around 2/3 of the Indian American population who are in the United States right now are from this third cohort. And you can also see in this graph, which is shown here, like the rate of increase is much significant after 2000 than before that. Now, how does it impact, right? How does it matter, like if there are three waves? One thing to note is like the first two waves distributed the Indian American population across the country. Now the third wave, because the jobs are primarily IT sector jobs and like software related jobs, they tend to concentrate around the cities. And this is a very significant point. When we go a little bit later on, I can explain like why that is. Now, if you look at like this chart actually, you can pinpoint like where Indian American population is located. It's mainly around cities. And it actually is influencing states like Virginia or Atlanta or Dallas. The immigration population around those cities has become to like a critical mass in terms of like they are ready to influence or already influencing the politics of that area, even including in New Jersey and surrounding New York. I wanted to spend a minute outlining the major differences between the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, and see like which of these two parties that Indian Americans align with in general. Like not everybody is the same, everybody's priorities are different, but in general, right? If you look at the major differences, Republican Party is more for free market economy. They are against the gun control or gun rights. They are often dubbed as like the very conservative party, and I don't know if it's right or wrong, but like they are definitely perceived as like against minorities. They're also very conservative on the social issues like abortion or gay rights, LGBT rights, so very conservative. Democrats, on the other hand, are also for free market economy, but they are a little bit more towards left than the Republican Party. They are definitely more liberal in social issues. They are definitely for like gay rights or for more gun control. And in general, especially the modern Democrat Party is seen as like towards the minorities, so or is for like the pro-immigration for the minorities. Indian Americans, if you can think about it, align more with Democrat Party on more issues. For example, like we are also on social issues, like we are also very against gun control. Like in terms of abortion, also we almost are like neutral. Like we don't have a strong position on that. Some people go towards left, some people go towards right. We definitely align with like rest of the minorities in supporting Democrat Party in most of the cases. But one thing to note is like we are also pro free market economy. After all, most of the Indian Americans came to USA in search for a green pasture to make more money. So and there is a perception, at least, like this one, the free market economy actually helps. Indian Americans often are called model minority in this country. I really don't know if we have all the statistics to show like that is true, but at least on the surface, we can say like there are some reasons for that. The number one reason being about 70% of Indian Americans have at least a bachelor's degree. Whereas when you compare to the rest of the population, it's only about 19%. Now, the average income of an Indian American is about $132,000 per year, right? When you compare that same with like rest of the population, it's only like $66,000. So we make like twice the amount of the rest of the population. Number three, the crime rate of Indian Americans is very low when compared to the rest of the population. And finally, and this might be like an important point too, is like you don't see Indian Americans actively participating in protests or populations, and could be considered as like very easygoing and low maintenance minority. So how did the Indian Americans voted in 2020 presidential elections that was held in November of 2020, which saw Joe Biden win the presidency? 68% of Indian Americans voted in favor of Joe Biden or Democrat Party, whereas 22% voted in favor of Donald Trump or Republican Party. On surface, this looks like a huge gap, which it is. However, one has to note that this support to Democrat Party, it seems to be on the decline. When you compare these numbers with like Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign in 2016, about 78% of Indian Americans supported her. And when you compare those numbers with 2012 presidential elections, where Barack Obama got elected second time, he was supported by 84% of Indian Americans. I don't know if it's really a trend or just a localized point, but one has to notice this decline in the percentage trend. As you can see from this graph, the top three issues that are influencing Indian Americans are economy, healthcare, and racism. It's not very surprising, and this is probably in line with like the rest of the American population. So economy, for it's being influenced due to COVID. All these economy and healthcare are top issues for the whole country, and Indian Americans are no exception to that. Also, as the viewers may not be aware, there was a huge debate about like the racism and race relations within the country, and that it's not surprising that occupied to be like the third issue that what decides to who we vote for in these elections. Now, the two things that are surprising for like a viewer is, one, the immigration is not really like an issue. It's like almost ranked 6th or 7th in the priorities, and so as like Indo-US relationships. I don't know if it's like a reflection of like in general all the trends like over the years, but yet somebody could say like that immigration ceases to be an issue once somebody has like a citizenship, right? Like this, I after living in 20 years in this country, I have not seen any time like Indian Americans in trying to influence US government on immigration issues. Two other points one need to understand about influence of Indian Americans have on US elections, 2020 US elections. One is we contributed about $16 million, $17 million around that ballpark as a political contributions, which definitely is a large sum. This is like the highest amount of, in terms of dollars, contributed by any minority group within the country, more than the Chinese Americans. It's actually even more than the what Hollywood contributed towards the presidential candidates. Saying that, one also need to understand the overall bill for these elections is about like $7 billion. So the amount we contributed, $16 million, is very minuscule when compared to that $7 billion that was spent in the whole elections. Most of this money has gone towards Joe Biden's campaign as opposed to Donald Trump's campaign, and most of this money was raised not as like individual donors, like an average Indian American probably has contributed nothing, but these were actually donated by using like the what they call it as political action committees, through fundraisers, through and in fact, like there is a list of like 200 Indian Americans, wealthy Indian Americans, contributing to like most of these $60 million. Now, the second point one need to also understand is like there was a lot of debate about Kamala Harris being like Indian American, and now she's a vice president, or soon to be vice president. That seems to have excited Indian Americans in general, and there's polls suggesting like that seems to have like brought up in more Indian Americans to the voting booths. That is true. However, one has to note that Kamala Harris herself describes her experience, growing up experience, mostly as African American experience as opposed to Indian American experience. The reason why I brought up that point is like it's only time will tell how much influence does any of the Indian American positions have on Kamala Harris when she's the vice president. Whether it helps us better the India-US relationships, we have yet to see. One thing is also to note that, as from my own personal experience, I have seen that the political activity of Indian Americans, whether citizens or still waiting in the line for the green card, has increased in last 4 years or like last 6 years or so. There are several reasons for that. One reason is like just like rest of the population, Indian Americans were very appalled with like the racist incidents or like the police brutality incidents that happened in the country. So we responded that. On the flip side, Indian Americans also, for various reasons, have moved towards Republican Party from the Democrat Party. One of the major issues being is like, I know it's not an issue for like the citizens already in the country, but the issues for like somebody who's in the green card line is having a green card, and reforms are needed in the immigration policy to have that process sooner, the green card process sooner. Currently, the wait could be anywhere between like 15 to 20 years for somebody to get a green card, and which is clearly not acceptable, but like that's a reality, right? Now, Indian Americans have historically, Republicans presidents, Donald Trump being an exception, but Republican presidents favor more immigration. Like they actually process, whether it's George Bush or like even before that, like other George Bush, they were the ones where the most of the immigration happened, and they were the ones who actually supported the reforms in the immigration, green card, removal of the green card. So that's definitely in the minds of the people who are not yet citizens, but who are waiting in the green card line, right? That's one reason. The second reason is like for the people who are already citizens, the economy has been doing good. Like if you think about it, like last 4 years, despite various setbacks, the coronavirus, the ongoing economic slowdown in various countries, US economy has not really slowed down. And people rightfully or wrongfully attribute that to like the Republican leadership and the free market economy. So one should not ignore that. So economy is the second one, right? Immigration, economy. The third thing, in my own opinion, there is a little bit of like Modi influence, Prime Minister Narendra Modi influence on the Indian Americans and how they perceive Donald Trump. One could call it as like President Modi's closeness to US Donald Trump, President Trump, has probably been playing in the minds of like people who are here and also making them move towards a little bit of towards them. You might have not heard about these organizations. There was like Hindu Republican Forum, Indian Republican Forum, and others, so who are actively campaigning for like President Trump when the election did happen. So what's next? What's the projection for next 4 years or next 10 years? Number one, I expect that there will be more outreach towards Indian Americans by both the political parties, especially in the swing states. Swing states are battleground states. As I already mentioned, the immigration population at this point of time has become a deciding factor between whether whether a Democrat wins or a Republican wins in some of the key states. Now that will continue to be the case for next 20 years as the overall population move towards the Sunbelt states. So there will be more outreach. One thing to note is like there hasn't been much outreach in the last elections or the previous elections, except in the localized population like New Jersey or near DC or Atlanta or Dallas. But that's probably will change, because as you can see, like when I'm talking to somebody in Dallas, like I'm influencing their thought process too, and vice versa. So political parties probably will reach out to like overall community as opposed to localized populations. That's one. Next one is like immigration reforms will continue to be like a hotbed issue for both the parties as relate to like Indian Americans. Number three, as currently Indian Americans have more political per capita than like any other minority group in the country, so that will continue to grow. That's my opinion. Number four, and this is where my opinion is that the Indian American population perhaps there will be like slight shift towards Republican Party from Democrat Party. Doesn't mean that like majority will support Republican Party in next 4 years or something like that, but it will not be like the 84 to like 15% support or something like that. It's more close to like maybe like 65% to 35% support, something like that. So finally, I wanted to thank all my references which I listed in the slide, and I also wanted to thank PSM Speaks for giving me this opportunity to provide a perspective of like my perspective of like how much influence did Indian Americans have on US 2020 elections. Thank you.